Hello and welcome to Business Today. I am Siddharth Zarabi and you're watching the first episode of the BT MindRush pods. These are pods that we hope to do with a difference. And today, kicking off this series in what has been a monumental week for India's civil aviation sector is Vinay Dube, the founder and Chief Executive Officer of Akasa Air, India's fastest growing airline. Also with us, Sanjeev Krishan, Chairperson of PwC in India, a familiar face on Business Today, someone who brings a lot of deep-seated experience and understanding of Indian industry and is one of India's foremost deal makers in an earlier avatar. But with Vinay, what we have here today is extensive experience in a sector that millions of Indians look up to for ease of travel, also for affordability, but that's a big question mark when it comes to certain sectors and certain times of the year and certain flight slots. And someone who's redefining how aviation is perceived in the country. Vinay, thank you very much. Sanjeev, privileged to have you here with us. What we are going to do is to first keep it a little informal. We are not doing a evening hour headline grabbing kind of conversation, and with Sanjeev here, we hope to draw out the best that you can share with us, because the ambit of the conversation, viewers, in the MindRush pods is to get you excited about the sector, the person who is here with us, and hopefully draw out insights that are reference material for you, and we will offer them all across Business Today's multiple platforms, including India's oldest and best known business magazine, one of the fastest growing digital operations, and Business Today TV. So Vinay, I'm going to kick this off with just trying to set the context. Viewers might catch this conversation a bit later, but we have to sort of, under fair disclosure, say that it's happening right at a time when Jet Airways, airline that you ran, has sadly and tragically gone under liquidation. Vistara, one of the finest brands, has also flown into the sunset in some ways. I took a flight on the last day of their operations. We have India's largest carrier going from its foundation as a budget airline to now also being a business class offering airline. Therefore this week will be one to remember for Indian skies for many, many years. How pivotal is the moment for India's aviation sector?
To be honest, Siddharth, I think news is in this particular week, but personally speaking, I don't believe that this particular week will define India's aviation sector, because I think India's aviation sector is this juggernaut that's going to grow, whether one airline is here or another airline is here, whether something is branded in a particular way or not. I think India's economic engine is going to define India's aviation sector for decades to come. And that has nothing to do with one airline or the other. So think about a country of 1.4 billion people with maybe 600 aircraft flying today.
Just 600?
Just 600. You may have a few more that are registered but are parked and are not flying. You look at the US on the backs of their recent election with 350 million people that are flying 7,500 aircraft. So just think about that. 350 million flying 7,500 and 1.4 billion people flying 600 aircraft. And it's not that India is a small country. We're not the size of Belgium, where the mode of transportation is something completely different. We're a very, very large country. And so aviation is going to grow by double digits for the next 30 years. And it doesn't matter who the players are, because that's the India story. And that's what's so exciting about aviation, is that you've got this amazing growth ahead of you. And so I don't look at aviation in India on the backs of 1 week or 1 day. I look at it on the backs of years. And that's the exciting part.
Sanjeev, creative destruction is a term and phrase that Indians know as part of our philosophy and ethos. Many years ago, I once heard the boss of a leading global airlines ask in a room full of journalists that he wondered why he was in the aviation business, because it meant that he would spend many sleepless nights dealing with various issues. And he also related another incident about how they managed to save quite a bit of money by removing one olive from the salad that was presented in flight meal. So it's a fascinating business, but the bottom line is the most difficult one perhaps amongst so many other industries that you've seen. You agree with what Vinay says, India soon to be a middle income country transitioning towards that kind of economic status, and aviation will continue to be a massive growth driver?
Well, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, we are aspiring to be the third largest global economy. In purchasing power terms, we already are the third largest. And if we look at what has been said in terms of India's aspiration from a GDP standpoint, $35 trillion by 2047, I think the next 20 years will really define how India captures the imagination of the world. There isn't a year there isn't a month actually which goes by without a tech entrepreneur visiting India. And India's services capabilities are now well renowned, and we are going beyond just services into R&D, innovation, and so on and so forth. Now, all of that consumerism, much of which is discretionary, is going to get people hopefully a lot more wealthier, and that will cause significant opportunities for the aviation sector. And I don't need necessarily look at it as discretionary, right? I mean, other modes of travel that we have in India, we know that, India's road transport and India's rail traffic network is doing exceedingly well, etc. But I mean, there is a capacity constraint that will come there. And I think a lot of that will also transition as India becomes more aspirational. I think a lot of that will also mean that a lot of Indians actually are flying. And I completely agree that the comparison that Vinay made in terms of the per capita utilization in the US, I think India has a lot to achieve, and I think that it's certainly to me a huge opportunity. And I think we can see it. I mean, just coming out of COVID, tourism as an industry or discretionary spends have just gone up. I mean, now of course people have been talking about more recently that will some of these trends plateau a little bit. But I mean, if you look at the trajectory over the last, I think 6 quarters, I think it's been tremendous. So I do believe that with the next 20 years, with what India seeks to achieve over the next 20 years, and I have no doubt that we will, both with all the investments that we are making, soft infrastructure, hard infrastructure, I have no doubt that Indian consumerism will rise and there will be significant opportunities for businesses like the aviation business.
Viewers, I also want both of them to sort of toss questions to each other, particularly Sanjeev to Vinay, but I'll just take moderator's privilege to introduce one more element. India is a price sensitive market across categories. And while there is aspirational spending and there is of course luxury spending that's also increasing, we see that play out in the housing sector. The point that Sanjeev made, price sensitivity must be a significant task, challenge and opportunity for people like you. I recently did a comparison of a short haul travel from the national capital to Ayodhya, in fact, to be very specific. And I realized that the differential between air ticket and first class train ticket had come down to roughly 40%. Earlier it was far, far more. Is that the future in terms of aviation pricing, or do you see pricing pressures remaining a constant for your sector, which has meant bankruptcies and financial trouble for many airlines in the past?
Yeah, I think first hats off to the Indian Airlines for being some of the most efficient in the world. So if you look at the cost structure that we have created in India, it is on par or better than some of the finest airlines in any other part of the world. So first, I would say that this doesn't happen, by luck. This happens by design, and this happens because we've got, some of the finest aviation minds in this country creating cost structures that are as affordable. I don't think long term you can sell a product below the cost of goods produced. So no, I don't think that this is something that's inevitable long term. I think you're going to see growth, but I think you're going to see stability in aviation as you have, a different, I'd say, genre of airlines today. Today you have airlines that are professionally managed. Today you have airlines that are well capitalized. Today you have airlines that don't have this differential in cost structure that separated one airline from another, which was close to 40%. And I think that's going to breed stability. And so I look at the next decade as one that has stability, but I look at the efficiency that's been created and engineered into India's airlines to be great for consumers. And I think you'll continue to have some of the best prices in India compared to any other part of the world, right? If you were to compare Delhi, Ayodhya equivalent in any other part of the world, the cost of the ticket will be 2x or 3x.
Oh, really? 2x or 3x?
Yeah.
Because a lot of consumers complain about surge pricing that we see, especially around, let's say, the most recent Diwali season that we saw.
I would say that any business, whether it's Uber, whether it is a Coldplay concert that was much talked about, whether it is airlines, whether it is, and really anything. I think prices go up and down, and I don't think prices should be defined by a particular week. I think you need to look at, what airline tickets cost over 12 months of the year. I think you need to look at what airline tickets cost today compared to 20 years ago. And I think you'd find that airline tickets have gone down, haven't even priced inflation over a 20-year period. And I think that's great value for money. And I think that's great value for money because it's been engineered, that efficiency has been built into Indian aviation.
And Sanjeev, this at a time when ATF prices and the taxation that we see continues to remain a point of concern.
Yeah.
Please step in.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, ATF prices have been the way it is. I mean, they've been relatively stable, I would say, over the last 3 quarters. But you're right. I mean, I sort of do tend to agree. I mean, see, it's a demand-supply situation, right? I mean, even if you're buying vegetables, right, when there is a shortage, the supply chain doesn't work, I mean, the prices shoot up, right? So there is a bit of a demand-supply thing, and there are, let's be honest, I mean, there are a lot more of us traveling during some of these festival seasons. We have a very long festive season in India, so I mean, those are opportunities in some ways. Equally, there are times when there isn't enough demand, for instance. So I think that it balances out in some ways. But Vinay, I think just one thing I wanted to pick up on the point that you mentioned, and I completely agree with the penetration levels that are possible. We have had a bunch of airline businesses failing, if I may call it so, right? I mean, they were well run for the time that they were running, and then of course things happened, etc., etc. We know that airlines is a capital intensive business, and that might put off some potential entrepreneurs who might want to actually enter the business. With your experience, I mean, how do you look at the landscape so far? And anybody who wishes to enter this space, what would you suggest to him or her?
Yeah, so I'd say as I look at the history of Indian aviation, and one of the benefits of having grey hair and worked in aviation for 35 years is you don't need to be a historian to understand what happened 30 years ago. You've lived it. And I go back to a point we were talking about potentially in one of the breaks, but what's happened in Indian aviation is a mirror image of what's happened, let's say, in US aviation or European aviation. And so nothing about that history troubles me. I'll just give you short examples. You had in the US TWA and Pan Am, these were these massive airlines. People of potentially our age might remember them. Some of the younger ones may not remember TWA and Pan Am, but these were household names. And then you had the likes of American Airlines and Delta and United and Continental, that bankrupted these, right, these massive, well-run airlines. And then you had the likes of Southwest as low-cost carriers that came in and then bankrupted, these airlines. And now you've got, through consolidation and restructuring of costs, you've got stability and profitability for a decade. This is exactly the way Indian aviation has played out. Right. And so I would say that, because we've got now, and we've entered and squarely in this era where we've got consolidation, we've got restructuring of some of the airlines, you've got professional management. I'm very excited that this is going to be stable and great for airlines long term. And I would say for young entrepreneurs that are looking to get into aviation, I would ask them to I would welcome them, but this is not one for the faint-hearted. You can't look at aviation in terms of quarters. You've got to look at aviation in terms of years. And this is where at Akasa, we keep saying there's nothing we do at Akasa that's for the short term. There's nothing we do at Akasa for 1 quarter or 2 quarters. We're building an airline where our grandchildren should have an ability to travel on them. And you have to take that long-term view in aviation, otherwise you'd go mad.
Sanjeev, I just want to bring up this for many of those viewers who may not be very tuned into aviation. Share with our viewers, how was Akasa founded? What was the thought process? How did it really happen? What did it mean for you and all those who decided to back this dream?
Right. So I think, honestly, Akasa was founded on just very, very simple principles, just the fundamentals. And the fundamentals were India is incredibly underpenetrated as far as aviation is concerned, with this, hard to fathom, unimaginable growth ahead. But yet we had, 1, 2 professionally managed airlines. It was stunning for me. Having spent 27 years in US aviation, it was stunning and surprising for me to see that, in this country of 1.4 billion people, that you had 1 or 2 professionally run airlines. So for me, this was just, a no-brainer that there's a spot here for us to create a third airline that has this massive runway. And then the only thing was, is this the right time? And there was no better time than COVID to actually start an airline. And it's very counterintuitive because as I, traveled the golf course with friends like Carl, telling them I was going to start an airline in the midst of COVID when 25% of planes are flying, they thought I was completely crazy. But genuinely, there was no better time, Siddharth. There was,
But history teaches us that some of the greatest businesses have been founded by people who were called crazy at some point or the other.
Right, and I'm sure I was. But you had an availability of aircraft, you had availability of people. I mean, highly qualified people. And when in the world do you have an availability of aircraft and people? Then
and airports too,
and airports and slots and a slew of other things, right? There's no other moment in our history when you had that kind of availability, and all you'd have to believe was that the world and the human race would be able to overcome COVID, right? That's all you had to believe, and that was, for me, that was easy to believe that we would get out of COVID 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, but we'd get out of COVID. Right, and as long as you believed that, it was easy to say, let's start an airline.
Sanjeev, consultants don't do crazy, and at least they don't do it well. But if he had asked you for advice at that stage when he kind of sort of started putting it in place, and I'm not even taking the conversation to iconic personalities who backed him, we'll come to that. What would you be able to say, wearing your consultant's hat, to other people, somebody with, this deep desire to strike out and do something on his own to learn from what Mr. Dube has managed?
We would have possibly said that's a good idea with 20 caveats. Well, I mean, honestly speaking, I think it takes some amount of entrepreneurial spirit, and what you just said. I mean, I completely resonate with that thought. In the moment, during the COVID time, how hard it might have been, unless you have conviction about something. Some of these things you can always say that let me wait a couple of years, right? I mean, let's wait 2-3 years, let's see how it all pans out, how the recovery happens, etc., etc. And I think it takes courage of conviction, and that's where I think the Indian entrepreneurial spirit needs to be celebrated, to my mind. I mean, clearly the opportunity was there. The underpenetration was visible. The lack of competition, relative lack of competition, should I say, was also there. But it still took somebody to have the conviction and the capital combined, as I say, soft capital and hard capital, to be able to start something. And I think that's where I think we should celebrate where Akasa is today.
There's also this bit about the enabling infrastructure, and let's try and touch upon that briefly. Both of you know this very well. would it be okay to posit that what's happening with your airline and in the wider aviation sector, and you spoke about, a long runway for growth, 10 years, how much of it is also on account of the infrastructure focus and drive of the central government, as well as many states being very forward-looking? I remember many years ago, when I was reporting on the aviation beat, one of the things that went on for years was trade union protests against initial attempts to privatize airport, despite Nedumusari being one of the first privately owned airports and setting really good benchmarks in terms of customer service, and also the first OMDAs, the operation, maintenance and development agreements that generated a lot of controversy, to now. How has the infrastructure focus of the policy establishment really helped someone like you?
I think if it were not for policy changes and policy execution and infrastructure investment, I don't think many dreams could be enabled that are associated with growth, right? You can't land a plane without a runway. You need to build runways, you need to build terminal capacity, you need to build air traffic, the softer things that people don't see, but air traffic management capabilities, otherwise you'll get congestion and that's no fun. But also policy. One of the things that I heard, one of the most discouraging things that I heard was, Vinay, you don't know anybody, you're a professional, you don't know anybody, you'll never get a license. Let's face it, this was one of the things of, okay, look at this person, he's trying to, get into a highly regulated industry without knowing anyone.
Did someone tell you that you are from outside, things don't work like that here?
Absolutely. I heard all of that. You're too naive. India doesn't work like this. You've been operating in the US, for 27 years. What do you know?
Did someone also say, "Unse baat karke aiye, pehle wo bahar baiठते हैं"?
No, I was not told that because they know that I was not open to it. I was not open to talking to anyone. I was open. I'm a sort of a rule abider by definition, and by the way, in aviation, that's a really good thing because SOPs and safety is absolutely paramount, and you've got to abide by those rules. It doesn't matter how boring it is, you've got to do it. And so, one of the things I want to talk about is the fact that we got our license in less than 2 years. From inception, from the day I woke up and told my family I was going to start an airline, and my wife told my kids, don't worry, your father's gone a bit mad, he'll get his marbles by tomorrow. From that time to our first flight was less than 2 years, Siddharth. Now you tell me, where in the world do you have the efficiency to provide an aviation license and get aircrafts in the air from inception, from the thought, from the seed, to the launch in less than 2 years? So I want to also shout out to the efficiency of the bureaucracy and the supportive bureaucracy and government policies that are not just associated with brick and mortar and runways and terminal buildings, but even the policies that allowed you to get your license, right, without compromising safety and without knowing anyone.
The change in file making, and this reminds me of another airline, Kingfisher, and that saga is very well known, reported. Jet, of course, we have spoken about. But from that time to now, Sanjeev, when even the issue of getting rights to fly overseas, even that was not just regulated, it was, I would say, heavily influenced by all manner of interests. What's changed, and what kind of credit should be giving to the center which manages aviation policy as a central subject to the Narendra Modi government and the kind of stability? And to add one more thing, the decision to divest Air India from central government, what kind of impact do you think it has had for the overall ecosystem?
I think to answer the latter question first, I think when I already answered that question, I think this consolidation is good in the industry. Every industry goes through a phase where there is a lot of growth and then there is consolidation. So I think that can only be good for the industry. To the previous part that you mentioned, I think it's always been a situation where at times there has been the entrepreneurial zeal which has been evident to do things, across not just airlines or aviation sector, but across industries. But maybe the policy system was not, or the policy regime was not enabling enough at different points in time. I think the big thing and the difference that I see over the last 7 to 8, 9 years in particular has been that the confidence that the consistency of policy has created in the minds of any entrepreneur or somebody who is willing to provide capital has been such that both are coexisting at the same time. And I think, whether it is the growth that we are seeing in this sector, and again, as Vinay said, there is huge amount of opportunity in that sector for everybody at this point in time, or for that matter, any other sector that we see, right? I mean, you look at the reform, the slew of reforms, the insolvency code came along, etc., which effectively now means that I'm very conscious about taking debt and repaying it, right? I mean, the kind of formalization of the economy that has happened through the GST, for instance. I think all of these created a lot of confidence in entrepreneurs within India, capital providers from India, outside of India, and the fact that they're coming together is actually creating this, this perfect situation where both can coexist, both can be certain of the other, because in the past we said, okay, something might go back, it might have retrospective effect, this, that, and the other. I think that's the story of the past, and I think that to me is the most encouraging part. The one other thing that I would say is that particularly when it comes to, and I think again when I said it, and I will possibly put it in the context of any other industry, let's say EVs for instance, right? I mean, it's about the ecosystem. Just by producing vehicles, nothing happens, right? I need to create an ecosystem that requires infrastructure investment, right? The fact that we are having gross capital formation of 33% for the last many years, which means the government itself has been spending a lot of money and encouraging private players to also spend. And I think credit has to be given to both, that somebody is putting the money out and somebody is leveraging on that investment which is happening, trusting it. And the final one, which I, again, since you gave me the opportunity, I must talk about is the digital public infrastructure. I mean, the way it has been leveraged and how easy it is for me to even book a ticket or take even a metro train ticket these days, or to make bank-to-bank transfers. I think this is what we possibly needed. I mean, I would much rather have had it 15 years back, but I'm glad that we have it, and my kids will savor it.
And Siddharth, allow me to boast just a little, but you had mentioned in your question to Sanjeev, international traffic rights. To give you a sense of the change, Akasa launched its first international flight in March of this year, well under 2 years, right? The 18th or 19th month. Never in the history of Indian aviation has an airline launched an international sector within 18 months. It's always been 5-6 years. Policy change enabled that, right? There was very specific policy change enabled that. And today, we fly to Doha, we fly to Kuwait, we fly to Jeddah, we fly to Riyadh, we fly to Abu Dhabi. And we're thinking of many other international destinations in Southeast Asia and East Africa, North, South. And so there's policy change that has allowed this kind of growth. And we've been the beneficiary of it.
How would India's aviation and airlines benefit from the Jewar airport? Why I ask you this is that even before the first commercial flight has taken off, landowners around that area have benefited. Right. So, this is quite interesting. Both of you should comment on whether you think this is a paradox, but something that's going to fly in the sky is already impacting real estate, land rates 30, 40, even 50 kilometers away. There's a massive boom happening and people say we don't know what's happening. But what will Jewar mean for that region?
So let me respond not just with Jewar, but let me respond with airports in general.
Yep.
Because I think it applies to Noida International Airport, it applies to Navi Mumbai, it applies to GOX, the North Goa Mopa Airport. It applies to really anywhere where you build airport infrastructure. And let me take one step back and just talk about transportation and how important it is in facilitating a country's or cities or states' growth. And the reason I say transportation is because this applies to highway infrastructure, that applies to local Transportation, it applies to, airlines for sure, it applies to, ports and ships. But any form of transportation is the foundation of economic growth. Without transportation, you can't have the kind of economic growth that you want. And so I think whether it's Jewar or Navi Mumbai, it's not so much that it'll benefit airlines. Sure, it will. But I think the more pertinent point here is it's going to benefit consumers, it's going to benefit businesses, and it's going to benefit and enable India's economic engine. Simple examples. Singapore built its entire economy on the backs of Singapore Airlines. Dubai has built, the economy of Dubai on the backs of Emirates. The reason people go to Dubai is because you can come and go and fly anywhere you want. And so states and countries are built on the backs of strong transportation infrastructure of every kind. And I think that's the beauty of the investments that are being made in airports today.
Sanjeev, come in on this.
I mean, my view is any kind of infrastructure development is not only necessary but also critical for inclusive development of India, because today I think we are focusing on sustainable inclusive development and the Udan scheme. Since you spoke about policy earlier, I think while you spoke about the airport, which is actually next to a metro, but I think this scheme is encouraging, and with the aspirational India that I mentioned earlier, I think it is just going to create an ecosystem where the infrastructure development will, of course, it will create huge amount of development, it will cause a huge amount of local employment, and I think employment of the local communities is very, very important because they need to have a stake in this development. And of course, there might be an opportunity for them to gain from it in different ways, etc. But I think the fact that from X number of aircrafts, from X number of airports, we have gone to 5x and we are now going to go to 10x, I think is something which will enable the local community involvement in it, which is very, very important from a perspective of inclusive India development. And I think that is to me, I mean, it could be just roadways, it could be just industries coming in there, it could simply be that more foreign universities are going to come in there, etc., which incidentally they are near Jewar, by the way. So I think all of that, it creates an ecosystem around it, and with all the opportunities that, for instance, because the airport is there, then you need to have best connectivity. I'm sure that sooner or later the metro will start going there, etc. So I think we'll create an ecosystem, and just imagine the prosperity that local people will have.
Since Sanjeev spoke about prosperity, I want to also bring out another factoid, and there are so many, and I hope we will have the time that is left with us to focus on that. I don't know how many of you know that India's big bull, and there's never been anyone like him, Rakesh Jhunjhunwala. Somebody, and while people focus on his wealth, the fact is, in my interactions with him, somebody who had the best sort of eye to pick up winners. And he picked you up, you picked him up. How did that story start? Tell us about that.
I would, I'm first, you're absolutely right. The late, great Rakesh Jhunjhunwala is just an amazing human being, super smart. But my sort of very, very short, compared to many other people, I had a short stint with him, but it was incredibly impactful, and I am ever so grateful. So we were introduced by somebody else, and it took a short amount of time to convince him that this was a good investment, because he was very intuitive. And the part that I didn't need to convince him of, because there was no other sort of India file or India Bhakt or someone who believed in the future of India more than him. So I didn't have to convince him that aviation is going to grow in India. All it took, and it wasn't long, was for him to believe that this was the right time to start the airline, because he believed in the India growth story more than anyone. And then sort of the rest is history. But just very, very fortunate. I mean, there are some things that he wanted us to make sure that we were kind, and good to our employees. And these are little things that people don't, hear about. But treating our employees with dignity and respect, and making sure that, we build an employee-centric company was important to him. Making sure that we were, focused on our cost structure, but we didn't lose sight of empathy with our consumers and our travelers was very, very important to him. I mean, this is sort of the ethos with which we live. We're building a company where service excellence and employee centricity are two of our tenets that we live by every single day. So he's continued to have an impact, and I would want to have a shout out also to the rest of the Jhunjhunwala family that stands by us every single day today. I mean, for me, I've just sort of lucked out. It's unbelievable how great they are.
Since I've known Rakesh and other members of the family, and understanding money is perhaps runs in their DNA, I have no other way to say this. He was also ultimately someone who was very focused on returns and a bottom line. I wonder whether you ever had any discussions mutually about, the future, a possible listing, getting more shareholders in. Did that ever figure in your conversations?
Not prominently. And the reason I say not prominently because, Rakesh was a long-term investor. The average length of his holdings, I think, was approximately 9 years. And you may want to verify that, but this is the figure that I remember. So he was not in it for the short haul, and this is the part that was so beautiful, was because, we all came together to say we're building this airline not for 1 or 2 or 3 years. Sure, I mean, does anyone think about, when we will list the company and take it public? Yeah, because, having a publicly listed company, gives you access to pools of capital that allow you to do, bigger and greater things. So that was it. Certainly, that was in everyone's mind, but that was not, anywhere near the central elements of our conversation. The elements of the conversation was, get your fundamentals right. Make sure you have an on-time and reliable airline. And again, just to boast a little bit, we are India's most reliable airline today.
Yeah,
right?
72% or
it's even higher. But so our regulator since 2023, January 2023, has been tracking Akasa, and we have been number one in these monthly polls. Probably twice as often as the next competitor.
How do you do this?
It's just by focusing on the fundamentals. So first, you put a stake in the ground that says, Akasa will be India's most on-time airline, and without telling all 4,400, 4,500 Akasa employees that this is important to Akasa, you can't achieve it, because this is a business where 1 or 2 people do nothing. You need everyone pointed in the right direction. Maybe there are other businesses, I don't know, where perhaps 1 or 2 or 5 people can make an impact. But in aviation, you need everyone, humming and pointed in the right direction.
Yeah, it's not just the pilot and co-pilots. It's actually several dozen people on the ground who get a plane up in the air.
Absolutely. It's a complex logistical operation. And so, you get to be reliable because everyone's reliable and everyone's playing their part in reliability. And then the other part, as I said, is we want to have service excellence at the heart of everything that we do, right? So whether it's the design of our seat cushions or the USB ports that we have, the cleanliness of our aircraft, the quality of our food, I mean, these are all extremely important elements to the offering.
I think there's a great message there because I hear a message of 4,500 people collaborating, right? I think it's a great
all the time
lesson that's important. No individual heroes, we're all together, and I think there's a great management lesson coming out of it, which we can all embrace. Vinay, just one question, since we are living in these times, and I think I must get your perspective on it. There are newer things which continue to disrupt businesses. There is this whole thing about generative AI, where particularly any consumer business or consumer-facing business is certainly thinking about it. How does Akasa think about things like Gen AI in particular, and do you think it could be a value creator, or do you think it's something that we need to watch out for?
I think both. And I think both those facts can coexist because it is clearly a value creator. I'll give you an example of how we're using AI today, already. So it's not something that we're thinking of in the future. We're using it today, and we're thinking of the next application and the next application and the next application. But like any piece of technology, right? Whether it's a phone, parents have to watch how much screen time their kids get, right? This is no different. It's a piece of technology, and we have to watch how it's used. But just to give you a sense, today for Akasa's cybersecurity, we're using generative AI to manage elements of our cybersecurity to make it stronger. Right. So these are things that we're using today, and I can give you other examples, but won't bore you with it. But I think it's both. Use it, exploit it for the benefit of consumers, for the benefit of our employees, and the benefit of the company, but be careful in terms of how you use anything.
Right. And many of our viewers would agree that over the past few years, the app experience of most of India's airlines is fantastic. As we wind down this conversation, Sanjeev, and this is a question that I'm posing to you. I have seen very flamboyance being at the heart of several previous aviation companies in the Indian context, larger than life figures who came from a travel industry background or a liquor background, and so many others. What seems notable about Vinay as a person is his discipline and his focus and the SOPs, and I can try and imagine what it must be sort of attending a meeting with him and the way he would be structuring his day and the day of everyone else who reports to him. Is that the most fundamental attribute that distinguishes a successful entrepreneur with a great idea from those who don't get that kind of success?
Well, I mean, I'll possibly need to spend more time to sort of figure that out, but I can only say that I think humility, being humble, being open, being transparent with your ecosystem, and being honest, as some of those virtues that Vinay spoke about, etc. And particularly his focus, and particularly for airlines like this, where passenger safety is the most important thing. I think these are very big attributes, right? Substance could be form could be important. Form could be important, but substance is the key, is what I would say, and I think that's what I've learned from this discussion. And I'm particularly encouraged, to say that the tagline that we use for our firm possibly is very apt for Vinay as well. Our tagline is that we give dreams to your wings. What am I saying? We give wings to your dreams. And I think that's exactly what Vinay is doing. So our tagline actually works much better for you, Vinay. You're most welcome to borrow it, because you are giving the wings to the dreams of India. So,
okay, and as a parting shot at my co-host, do you like talking to consultants and picking their brains for business ideas, strategies? What do you think of consultants in general?
100%. I think, first, I don't think there's this sort of generic consultant. I think that's a misnomer.
Okay.
I think they're people. I think there are consulting companies. Different consulting companies have different cultures. And I just don't think there's anything generic, but I think the reason I say absolutely, and is because the minute you start running aviation with only aviation people, you're in deep trouble. And I suppose it applies to other industries as well. That if you're not willing to get people from other industries, why should the Akasa app not learn from the Amazon app, as an example? Right? And if you don't get people from Amazon, you don't get people from other industry, why should Akasa's service excellence only learn from other airlines? Why can't we learn from other elements of hospitality? And unless we're willing to get that view, and some of that view comes from people that we hire from other industries, and so having diversity of thought in the people that we hire is extremely important, other than diversity of gender and other manners of diversity. But having conversations with diverse people, and consultants have deep exposure to a plethora of other industries. That's the only way we learn. So the answer unequivocally is yes.
The only way that you can learn. That's going to be my key takeaway from this conversation. Viewers, you might have guessed that by the end of it, there's a mutual admiration society that seems to have developed. I've been a great admirer of Sanjeev, and this is my first formal interaction with Vinay, and I joined that club, if there were one, of a mutual admiration society. And I'm going to make an effort to actually fly your airline. I have missed that a couple of times, but that's my loss, not yours. But viewers, we'll keep coming back with more, people of a very distinct and rare background, a rare breed really, during this MindRush pod series. The idea is to offer you perspectives and deep insights on what it really is important to become successful. Vinay, thank you very much. Sanjeev,
thank you so much.
Thank you for your time. With that, it's a wrap. See you very soon. Bye-bye.